All right, everyone, how we doing? This is Zcast here with you live for a live stream on October 5th, 2016. This is in regards to Hurricane Matthew and no other system but Hurricane Matthew. Not that there's much to talk about Nicole anyway, but we're going to talk about some of the trends that have shown a western shift once again, what Matthew's current state is. All right, everyone, how we doing? Hold on there, sorry. And also where we can see it going 96 hours and beyond. So give people just a minute here to load in. I know we've got several people joining today. And, again, this is going to be informative in the near term. I'm really not going to talk too much about long term. I know the models have been looping and whatnot. If you're looking for clarification on that, that's not going to come till later. This is in the short term. And let me know if you guys hear echo. That was my volume on my control room live stream, so sorry about that. But give people just a second here to load in. Let me know if you guys still hear echo. Okay. Let me know if there's an echo. 1, 2, echo. Never had that happen. Okay, good. Chris, glad you're saying that as well. Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and get started here. A few minutes late. I have this satellite image up here because I want to show you guys something in particular. Let me go back a couple frames, and you can see here. So I was not as prepared, so give me just a moment. You can see in this area right here that the inner wall in the last hour has seen quite a bit of convection. As Matthew made its way over eastern Cuba, it interacted with the coast much more than I thought it would. Even though it was modeled that way, it did appear as though it was going to go a little bit more northeast and avoid it. It didn't actually. Went over this region right here, meandered a little bit, and then kind of took this path, as we see right here, and it's starting to shoot over. So what's interesting is that it took a little bit longer than modeled for the system to start reorganizing itself. It was in pretty bad shape here about 8 hours ago, 10 hours ago. But again, Matthew is a little bit of a survivor because when it was down in the southern Caribbean, when it was interacting with the Venezuelan and Colombian coast, and it had that convective blob behind it, and it was kind of affecting its expansion and the outflow, it still managed to get to a category 5 in those conditions in waters that are not as warm as the Bahamas. And I think we're going to start to see that trend here as well with Matthew. Now, there's been some talks from hurricane hunters. I know the Weather Channel said that the inner wall was in bad shape, and that's very, very true. The inner wall wasn't in terrible shape, but it was not conducive to a normal category 3 hurricane, right? Most hurricanes should weaken. In the case of Matthew and the way that it has evolved over time, there is something to the makeup of this storm. And again, this will have to be analyzed probably over the next 6 to 10 months, 6 to 12 months. But there's something about this storm that allows it to intensify quickly, and we're seeing that happening right now. So that's something that just went back on me there. But this is something that we need to understand, that this system has already overcome obstacles to get to category 5 status. Not that I think it will get back there, but I think it's a definite possibility if it continues to intensify the way that this moves along. All right, and the next thing too is I've heard a lot of stories about, well, you know, the actual the actual intensity of the storm can't go any higher because the Bahamas water base does not support it, like the actual waters don't support it. On this graph here, it shows you 30 degrees Celsius waters that are roughly 100 meters deep. And that is plenty of warm water to fuel a Cat 4 system with enough intensification and enough structure, a Category 5 as well. So, the thing that we need to reiterate is the rhetoric that's out there that this region doesn't support Category 5 storms. It's just simply not true. And the next thing I'm going to be showing you here is the European high-resolution model run from 2 p.m. today, the 12Z. The reason I want to show it is because I want to show the West Tick. I want to also show areas that are now needing to really take notice, especially in South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia, that this is now in your backyard more than it was in the previous run. And again, just something that you need to take note of. Okay, and I apologize. This is another one too. I made up this. This is based off of the actual storm surge model, or the storm surge product that the NOAA puts out. The area I have highlighted in blue here, this is the entire region that will be affected by near Category 4 or Category 4 strength hurricane. Winds, rains, etc. We'll get more into the how widespread this will be. But if you're anywhere in this region that's marked blue, you should expect some pretty terrible conditions over the course of the next 36 to 40 hours. I'm sorry, a duration of 30 to 46 hours. This won't actually hit for another 30 hours. All right, so first things first, we go over here to the European model. And this is its approach here to southeastern Florida. Again, Miami down here, a little further north. You make your way up here. This tends to be the area, kind of the sweet spot, if you will, that the models have been showing for landfall. But as you can see, a very significant storm. Next frame, 6 hours later, it approaches at a pretty high clip. It is a little faster than the previous European run, so keep that in mind. Next frame, you can see those lines that are in there are very tightly packed, and that suggests a very intense system, as in an intensifying system as it approaches the coast. I think that's important to note here too, people. At no point before landfall is this scheduled to have any weakening. That would be a huge plus for Florida if there was some weakening before it made landfall. The opposite is actually going to occur. The intensification will continue until landfall. And one of the other things too I want to mention, one of the other things I want to make sure that people understand is, as this makes its approach to the Florida shores, sorry, if I said east, I meant west. It has been a very long day, very long week, so I apologize. I did mean west, so apologize for that. But yes, this will intensify as it makes its way west into the shores of Florida. Now, once it does make this landfall, which I believe is in the next frame, you can see here, this is a technical landfall right near the Space Coast, Cape Canaveral. Once this happens, don't expect this system to weaken like you would see with maybe a North Carolina landfall, or somewhere, for example, even somewhere along the Jersey Shore or something to that degree. Or the topography in Florida is so flat that it will not hinder the wind speeds within 40, 50, 60 miles inland. Okay, they're going to slow down somewhat because when the winds whip their way across, just due to the fact of friction, they're going to slow down. The winds will actually slow down a little bit, but they're going to careen across the state. And if this model continues the way it's showing, again 6 hours later here, and keeps going up the coast that it's showing, that is a clear indication that they're going to see sustained hurricane conditions from Central Florida all the way up through Jacksonville. That's something that needs to be understood. The topography of Florida does not automatically weaken storms, or weaken hurricanes in this case, because of the simple fact that it's so flat. There have been some hurricanes that have actually made landfall in Florida and have intensified. Because again, those are more in more swampy, marsh-like areas, but again, and around Orlando, if we go back here, right, Orlando being in this region, we could see this could take a lot longer to weaken than people would hope for. So that is something that needs to be understood. Landfall does not equal immediate weakening with this system, like many other landfalls, because of the topography of Florida. But as we move along and makes its way up the East Coast, you can see here it is really riding that East Coast shoreline. Comes offshore here. Now the GFS was a little bit west of this, and the Euro has continued to push west as well. So we'll see if it actually comes off the shore and heads due north as it's depicting here. But as you can see here, Savannah, Georgia, and making its way into Charleston are beginning to get into a danger zone with this system that continues to drop tons of rain, which we'll get into that in a moment, and also high winds whipping across low-lying areas. And again, there won't be much weakening of this system as it initially makes its landfall and heads up the coast. Now, the next frame I think is most interesting out of this entire run, because now it wants to make landfall again near Charleston, South Carolina. This would actually be a terrible scenario for South Carolina, because the amount of rain that you guys have gotten already along the East Coast up into North Carolina, we'll get in that too in a minute, but now you have these hurricane force winds that are whipping in, and the amount of rain that this thing will dump is impressive, to say the least. One of the things I want to show you is, notice here where the precip shield is, right? It's to the left. It's to the northwest orientation, okay? The next frame, this sucker shifts north. That precip shield, as this goes northeast, it rotates around. So versus it being more out over the ocean, if you will, it's now rotated itself right over land, and it will continue to dump winds and rains. Next frame shows it even more. The next frame, this low is right knocking on the door of Myrtle Beach, and dumping tons of rain. This area does not need this water. And people that are from there will tell you that. They do not need this rain. They do not need an intensive system to come through. The grounds are already soft. If you add intense winds on top of the fact that you have now an oversaturated grounds, trees will fall, foundations, etc. I mean, there's just going to be, if this were to verify in this amount of rain, there would be a lot of damage along the coast in South Carolina and inland as well. And then the next frame I want to show you here is over North Carolina. North Carolina, for the first time, is starting to see some effects from the European run. And as you can see, while the system does weaken somewhat, let me scroll over here, you can see tons of rains, again, dumped into North Carolina, with at least Cat 1 to tropical storm winds making their way through. And in the next frame, and I had to change the region because it shifted so far over, The Outer Banks is starting to get it as well. Emerald Isle, that region. Coastal erosion is a guarantee if this were to verify, as well as tons of rains that are being dumped through. We'll get more into how much rain here in a little bit as we make our way through this total run. Here's the next frame. Apologize there. Here we go. Again, Outer Banks affected. And the storm surge is going to be moving in this direction, in a east-northeast direction. Okay, so inlets are going to get inundated with surge, not to mention flooding, regular storm surge from the east to west. So it's going to be, if this were to verify, this would not be a good time for the Outer Banks. So that's the European run. And so far, the track has been pretty close. If not, the verified track is a little bit, just a tad west of what it was modeled. That would just mean a more direct landfall. But generally speaking, it's pretty accurate as far as where the path this is taking. And this here is the wind field that we'll be looking at. And guys, anywhere in this area where you see like a dark maroon, that's 160 mile an hour winds that will be whipping through Nassau. I can only imagine right now people in Atlantis at that casino in Nassau are trying to get the heck out before this gets close, changing flights, etc. But it's going to be an absolute shit show here soon. But as you make your way up the coast, you can see here that hurricane force winds are going to make their way inland about, in some areas after landfall near the Space Coast, and as far inland as 80 miles, right? And that's concerning because these are sustained winds. These are not wind gusts. These are sustained winds. And when we're talking about a system that's going to move and take rather about 30 to 38 hours to move from this region here up to about South Carolina, that is a long duration event with winds and rains. Again, something that this region hasn't seen in at least 12 years. And scraping the coast like this, I don't think there's been a system that's done this since the late 1890s, from what I was able to find. If someone finds a different analog that's done this, please message it to me and I'll mention it. But I could not find it. European ensemble members. So you can see here a great deal of members showing direct landfall into Florida, many coastal scrapers, and then there's some outliers here as well. I can tell you right now, this is a pretty old spread. These on the right will not verify based on its current path right here. So you might have some that go just east, and this would be an awesome scenario for Florida if this were to happen. But it's looking more likely into that 70 to 80 percentile range that it's going to make landfall. We'll get into the questions here in a minute, guys. Sorry. I know there's a lot. But very briefly, I will talk about the spread afterwards. Look, the European, it has so many members spaghettied out. It has no idea what it's going to do after the 96th hour, 100th hour of this storm. There are many scenarios where it could loop back. There are many scenarios where it could come up and affect North Carolina up into the mid-Atlantic. There are many that go out to sea. The fact is that a lot is to be told about this storm 96 hours out from here. So I will continue to track this, but for right now, this broadcast is about the short term. And the next thing I want to show you here, I think this is significant. This is a great product out of the University of Albany. They take the European members and create this heat map, if you will. And you can see here where this X is showing the actual verification where the trek is versus what the operational run shows. And it's just a tick west, but you can see it shows Florida landfalls, right? Well, this was from the run early this morning. This spread right here was from the run this afternoon. This is the brand new spread. And as you can see, there is a pronounced shift west into Florida. There's the old run. Here's the new run. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit easier for people to see in this region. There's the old run, the old EPS members from this morning's run. This is this afternoon's run, a pronounced shift west in these EPS members. That's significant, guys, because you were essentially doubling the amount of real estate affected by an eye wall path across the East Coast up into Savannah, up into Charleston area. So I know I've been emphasizing this west shift because the trend is your friend. As you guys know, I say this all the time. The trend right now, 24 hours leading up to the land interaction with this storm, is it wants to come west. So that's something that you must keep in mind. If you're anywhere in this region on the East Coast of Florida and you are kind of maybe trying to convince yourself that this isn't going to happen, or maybe you saw someone say something on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and it's kind of like, oh, it's just going to rain. Guys, this is raw data right here in front of you. This isn't someone making a spin, a meteorologist trying to make a name for themselves on a local news station, right, with an educated guess, which most of them are doing an excellent job. I've only seen a couple crazies, but that's territory. That's the territory. But this is raw data straight from University of Albany. No spin. I'm just presenting to you as is. And you can see there's a pronounced west shift. Next thing, total rainfall. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a heartbreaking slide, guys, because if the GFS and the European verify the way that they have shown, and so far they're verifying on track, there are areas along the coastline of North Carolina and South Carolina that could see 20 to 24 inches of rain from this. And I don't need to tell you that that would be devastating, along with the wind field. And even into Florida, where you won't quite get as much rain, but you'll get it quicker because the system does appear to slow down somewhat up here. But you will get it quicker, and you will get the wind field as well at a higher category strength. So, as you can see, there are some major concerns with the amount of rainfall that is happening with this. And the HRRR, this is a great short-range model. I start using it roughly 24 hours out from an event in the winter. It works great in tropical situations as well because the system is very organized, so it's able to read the surface and medium range heights very well. There's a disturbing trend with this. I don't know if you guys noticed, but here's Miami right here. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit. But here's Miami right here. This is showing a definite southwest shift. Now, I don't know if this is going to verify at all, but I can tell you that the HRRR does a very good job in the short range. And it is showing a near Miami landfall right now, which, by the way, right now does not have a hurricane warning. I can't explain that, and I won't. I think they should have been warned 12 hours ago, because the simple fact that the European EPS members, if we go back here a couple, look how many EPS members bringing into Florida. I'm sorry, not into Florida, into the Miami area. Like there are several within that red range. So why they're not hurricane warned, I don't know. I can't tell you. And the HRR right now is saying, hey, I think it's going to be more of a southwest shift. And that's just about a 50-mile shift, too. It's not even that pronounced. So guys, as you can see in the short term, there's a lot of data that we have that supports that southern Florida to central Florida will see a Category 4 strength system slam into the shorelines here in the next 24 to 30 hours, probably closer to 30 hours. And this is a system that is intensifying, not weakening as it lands. This is a system that is over waters right now, and I've got to pull up an old slide here, so give me a second to find this. But this is a system that is pulling up into waters that are in the 29 to 29.5 degrees Celsius range. And actually, in this area, that looks like it's a 30 to 31 degrees Celsius patch right there. So again, there's a lot of indicators with this that we could see an unprecedented event carving up the coast, making its way up through South Carolina, or across Georgia first, into South Carolina, into North Carolina, as the Euro has illustrated. And as we speak, the system continues to intensify. So if you have loved ones that are in Central Florida, Eastern Florida, Southern Florida, I'm pretty sure by now they've already started to take some sort of action. But I've heard many stories about people being stubborn and saying, well, I've been here for the last 10, 15 years. I've only seen one hurricane. I've seen no hurricanes. It's not going to happen, yada, yada. It's just hype. At this point, if you are hearing people say that, it's either denial, stubbornness, or just not educated. So I really hope that, I hope Lucy pulls the ball on us and we totally whiff on this, right? And data totally whiffs on this, but it's knocking on the door, and it's knocking on the door quickly. Because if you start this loop right here, let me just refresh the page, make sure I have the most recent run here. We're like 500 miles off the shore right now, and that's it. So expect a Florida impact. I would definitely think that this path here that I'm going to rewind and show you, at the European depicts, I think this is a very likely scenario. I won't talk about the loop because, again, there's a lot to be seen there. But I think this path right now is set in stone, maybe left to right by 50 miles. But Florida needs to prepare, Georgia needs to prepare, South Carolina needs to prepare, and North Carolina really needs to be aware because of that precipitation shield that a high-level flood event could occur. So guys, I'm going to leave it open for questions. I know I've gotten several notifications up here. I'll check to see if there's anything in particular that we could cover. But please go ahead and ask questions. I know the chat's filled up a little bit. But let me know if you have any questions about the system. Yeah, my fans are really kicking right now. I apologize on my PC. I did a Windows 10 update, and all of a sudden my system's running hotter. I can't even. Check my Facebook page, see if you guys have any questions. I'll continue looking through chat here in just a second for your questions. Will, you're saying that overcoming increased obstacles suggests additional energy may have been drained. There really are no more obstacles left in the system. The Bahamas themselves will not hinder any sort of development or intensification. We're already seeing signs of rapid intensification. There is a definite uptick in the convection of the system. So there's quite a bit about this that shows that it has no obstacles until it makes landfall in Florida, and even then, not much to weaken it. Tampa, Florida, you will not have to worry about much except for some rains and some winds. And I'm talking on the lighter side like you would on a normal blustery day. So don't worry about that too much. Landfall expectation. Land interaction will begin tomorrow evening. So Thursday night, early Friday morning into early Friday morning, mid-morning landfall. Because I do think it's going to speed up a little bit more than modeled. I didn't mention that. Sorry. The trend has been faster. And the models are suggesting faster each run. So if you kind of do the math, you're expecting a Friday noon landfall. In actuality, it's probably a late morning landfall. If you're living in Orlando, because people think it's more central, it's not as bad. It's not as bad as the coast. You're right, but it is going to be one hell of a ride, and I just don't know how that area's infrastructure is going to handle powering that many people and holding up. I really don't. A lot of wind and rain, some sustained winds of 100 to 120 miles per hour, and some gusts that could exceed 140. So I'm still going through the chat here. Models are updated. The GFS updates every 6 hours. The European updates every 12 hours. The HRRR, which I will be using here forward, updates every hour. Will asking, if I live in Charleston, when will I really know this thing is coming our way like this model suggests? At this point, it seems plausible it slams Florida directly and breaks or some other outcome. Okay, so correct. Charleston could be spared a direct hit, unlike the Euro's suggesting. Unfortunately for Charleston, the GFS is also suggesting the same thing. And as you can see here, it is a little bit off the coast, but enough to cause hurricane conditions inland for about 30 to 40 miles. Quite a bit of flooding involved as well. So again, Charleston's really not in the clear. If this storm were to shift any more east, right? So let's say, for example, instead of Fort Lauderdale area being hit, I'm sorry, not Fort Lauderdale, Cape Canaveral. Let's say landfall is actually up here, right? Then that's when I think you're going to see that pronounced curve into Georgia, into Charleston, if that were to happen. But if it happens the way the Euro depicts it, which is a Cape Canaveral landfall, it then has time to curve out like so. Not be directly onto Charleston, although this run does show a Charleston landfall. The further west this goes, the better off for Charleston. The further east it goes, the more likelihood of a direct hit. Well, Saturday impact, yes. Yeah, the thing with that is, as far as you leaving and when you should leave, just play it on the safe side. Listen to your local officials. If you hear that you have loved ones nearby that say, "Hey, come see us," or if you have friends inland, it won't hurt you for one night to go in. It really won't. It really won't. Yesterday I mentioned that waves being 40 to 60 feet plus the surge. How's that changed? I've seen some estimates now of 20 to 40 feet, 40-foot waves. I've got so many tabs open here. I got it somewhere, but I still think it is not out of the realm of possibility for 40 to 60-foot waves in this area, right? Let me pull this up here real quick. In this region, especially, because that's where water is going to funnel with the surge. Hurricane. So Hurricane Andrew was being called a Cat 4 until months later. I think it was actually longer, but any chance this is the same situation? Here's the thing. Remember, intensification is very well possible. And the HRR is depicting that as it makes its way. You can see the eye wall is a little bit oval versus that traditional pinhole look, which you don't really get much with Caribbean systems. But you can see right before it makes landfall, it's showing those inner walls at a very intense, a high intensity. So it's intensifying before it makes landfall. So it won't take us months to find out what it actually was. We'll know within the day what it was upon landfall. But it can intensify, and it is as we speak. Charlie asking, what do I think is causing the pressures to not drop for the storms right now? Expansion. Right now, Matthew's going through a great deal of expansion, right? So when you have wind fields that expand and outer bands that expand, the pressure itself doesn't necessarily lower, but the storm itself is becoming broader and thus causing a wider impact. As that widening tends to slow down tonight, that's when I think you're going to see the pressures go down because the outflow is there. You can see it on the radar as we speak. I can freeze frame it here. This isn't going to help me any. Hold on just a second. Unfortunately, I got to use the rainbow top, but we'll pull it up anyway. Let it load. But what I was getting at is the expansion of the system is causing this pressure not to come back from these recon readings showing any drops. And you can see here also, this thing is wobbling like crazy. And that is because the inner wall is firing off a ton of convection. And it is literally causing this thing to wobble because of the amount of intensity that is happening within the core of the system that will eventually cause it to expand out further. And you can already see where it was just 6 hours ago to where it is now. It hasn't moved very far northwest, and it is grown quite a bit. So guys, anybody in Miami, if the HRR were actually verified, this would be very bad for National Hurricane Center. I personally think it's being a little bullish in its western movement, so don't take this at all for gospel. But I do think that Miami needs to take notice. They need a warning and to get people to prep. and be able to, if people want to leave, get the heck out, make their way west towards the Gulf, if they can. You know, it's funny. I'm just reading someone saying, I think it's hilarious that Norcross and the Weather Channel was trying to say the hurricane would never recover because of how the eye looked. You know, he's not wrong, because in so many systems, you actually see, like, they're basically disabled after landfall, like it experienced in Cuba. The inner wall is hard to recover, right? But this system, and I'm glad you brought this up because I did forget to mention this. This system is the longest major in the history of the Atlantic Basin. It has stayed at a category 3, 4, or 5 longer than any system in the history of the Atlantic Basin. That is significant because this is not a traditional hurricane. This is one that has went intensified from a category 2 at 75 miles per hour. I'm sorry, category 2 at 95 miles an hour to a category 5 with sustained 150 mile an hour winds in a 12-hour period. In an area that wasn't very favorable near the Venezuelan Colombian coast. So this is not a traditional hurricane in the sense that, based on what we've seen in the past in the Atlantic, it has been a hurricane, a major hurricane, longer than any other. It has more kinetic energy than any hurricane in the Atlantic Basin. It now holds the all-time record. And it has already once gone from a Cat 2 to a Cat 5 in no time, in less favorable conditions than this system is right now in the Bahamas. Okay, everybody, if you're asking about specific location, put the question on my Facebook page. I'll have to look up and see some storm surge models and whatnot, but we'll talk more about that. Put a post on my Facebook page asking for a specific location. I'll help you out there. But yes, Palm Coast will have major effects. How do you measure kinetic energy on a large scale? So there are a few methods. Honestly, right now, with the way that models produce data, it's very easy to extrapolate that and see the total kinetic energy over the course of a history of a system, and that's what people are using for this. I unfortunately will not be streaming for the midnight suite or the 2 a.m. suite tomorrow at earliest. All right, guys. If you have any other questions, please let me know. If you would, please leave any questions that you have on my Facebook page. And again, if you have people in South Florida that you know of, please make sure that they understand just to follow government procedures, make their way west, take shelter in place, and be safe. And I will update as we make our way into tomorrow. Thank you.